Coaching in Session,
your exclusive destination for unparalleled personal and professional growth.
With your host, Michael Rearden.
Whether you choose to live within limits or break free, your mindset journey begins here.
Welcome, John Geraghty, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Michael. Thank you for having me. Excited.
Of course. Oh, yes, I'm excited too. I love everything that you do, and I'm excited to share your life or just a bit of it with the audience today, because the work that you do as an optimal performance coach is not just helping people reach peak performance, it's understanding what is today and what is tomorrow. And that mindset is going to be helping people understand that the journey of life might not be a straight line. They might have an idea of what they want today, but then in the future it could be different. And so when we look at life, there's going to be many different facets. And I'm just so excited to be able to talk to you about your work and then, of course, your journey thus far. But if you could, can you tell the world who you are, what you do, and of course, how you help people?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm an optimal performance coach, and I call myself an optimal performance coach versus a peak performance coach. Because a lot of times when you think about peak performance, it's about, are you really prepared for that one day, the Olympic event, the whatever it happens to be? And the work that I do is help people look at their entire lives and how do you integrate the different roles that you play and how do you bring the right focus of resources to those different roles so that each of them is optimized, that you don't create an imbalance in your life where you have a thriving business career and your relationships falling apart, or you're doing great in your relationship and your business, but your health is falling apart, right? It kind of has to be all there together. And as someone you were mentioning, somewhat more seasoned, right? So I'm 62 and I've been involved in business and working with people for quite a while. I've been a coach for 20 years now. I've had an opportunity to see my clients also become more seasoned. Because as a coach, what you probably notice is that they tend to reflect you a bit, right? My clients are more similar in age to me. And what people are often looking for here, we had that big vision of what we were going to create professionally. And, maybe we even the vision about being a great dad or spouse or things along those lines. But, all of a sudden we're empty nesting and we've hit a lot of our business goals. But as a 62-year-old, a healthy 62-year-old, we look into the future and we'll probably have another 30 years to play. And it's about really recreating a clear vision of what do I want to have happen from here on? Like with this foundation that I build, how do I launch into something that continues to be really exciting and pull my best? Because from my perspective, too often we get to this point and we've been sold this idea like, oh yeah, you get to retire. To what? And I think there's way too much talent and capability and resources that are stepping off the playing field because it was kind of what they were told was going to be the big reward. But it's really not as rewarding as many people expect it to be, right? We know that health begins to decline when you're less engaged intellectually, you're not challenged. The way I think about life in general and the growth or shrinkage is that we're either growing or shrinking, right? We've often heard that. But the idea is like, if we're pressing against our capabilities, right? Or reaching out and we're trying to expand, well, then our capabilities continue to grow out. And on the flip side, if we start to pull in the challenge, then what happens is the world comes down and collapses upon us. It doesn't, you don't keep this big gap from the challenge, right? All of a sudden, these other things begin to be a challenge. So if you're like, for instance, not physically engaged, and you're not staying strong and vital and things along those lines, then, carrying the groceries becomes difficult. I have someone that I know that's in my life that's, a little older than me. And we were having a conversation and, I'm pretty good with my diet. I'm a very consistent exerciser and things along those lines. And they were like, because I always exercise. And they're like, I don't know how you just do this. But I'm thinking like, for me, my exercise is not that much more difficult than for you climbing those stairs. Like to me, I'd rather go intentionally do some challenging stuff every day so that the rest of my day, whatever I want to do physically, I'm able to do. And I think that's true intellectually, right? By continually growing our capacity emotionally to have high stakes conversations, to really address issues with people, to solve things. And so when I think about optimal performance for myself or my clients, it's about how do we find those edges in all the areas where you are? Because we always grow from where we are. right? We're always like, wherever your next step is, it's from the step before. I laugh, like you think about like Google Maps, right? If I say, hey, I want to go to San Francisco, Google Maps is going to go, okay, but like, where are you? And so if sometimes even if like an exercise program, you'll see somebody, like, oh, I want to be in this kind of shape. And the trainer will start working them out like they're here. And they're like, no, they're here. You need to work them out right back here. They can get here, but they're not there. And I think the same is true with everything. You want to make your relationship better, meet it where it is and make it a little better. What can you do today? What can you do today to deepen that relationship? What can you do to contribute a little more? As in your own skills, like where are the edges of your capacity and whatever it happens to be, so we can continue to move.
I like the idea of just being able to optimize multiple areas of your life, because when we think of what people typically do, they get to good enough. They say, okay, this is manageable. My family is doing okay. My relationship is doing okay. She's not filing for divorce yet, so I must be doing something okay. My work is okay, could be better. And people sometimes they just accept maybe just enough. And so what is the inhibitor or the epiphany that someone will hit to say, hey, let me start to look at these areas to enhance them rather than to just allow them to remain stale and stagnant?
Well, there's a lot of work in the area what they call your future self, right? And the idea that historically what we believed, or what was believed in psychology, is that our future is going to be an evolution from our past. And so if you look at the past, you can kind of go, look at my trajectory, here's where I'm going. And what they have found is really the most powerful thing is your compelling vision of the future. And so if somebody's in good enough, then I think it's a real opportunity to say, hey, that's great. You can absolutely stay there and you can stay with that satisfaction. But if life were to be better, like if you were to be really thrilled today about getting up and I were to ask you that question, you were to say, my relationship's amazing. What would be true about your relationship? And then they have to really think about like what that would look like, or what would be true. Like, okay, I hear a lot, I'm in okay shape for my age, right? People will say that. And you're like, so what does that actually mean? And what if you were in just great shape, period? Right? What if you were just physically super capable, just like you were when you were 30? What would it let you do? Like, would that be better or worse? Which would you prefer? Like, if you could choose one, which would you choose? And so you get people to understand that they have an opportunity to create something great, but they have to be able to and willing to envision it. So identity beliefs are so huge, right? Identity beliefs act as a thermostat in our lives. And just like the thermostat kind of tells you the temperature is going to be in this range. And so if you have your thermostat set at kind of lukewarm, then you're going to be lukewarm. And it's going to just kind of stay there. But if you want to change something, you really have to lean in and think about, okay, what does that even look like? What is the temperature that I'd like to set that at? And then the other side of it is, as you know, I'm sure, growth is fun, right? I remember I'm a longtime recovering alcoholic, but back in the day, I remember, weekends are made for Michelob and, it's filler time and like all that stuff, right? And so we're kind of bought into that and the idea of leisure, but the research into what brings us real satisfaction is full engagement, right? When they look at what really causes high levels of life satisfaction, it's super highly correlated with a lot of flow in your life, right? Like that Csikszentmihalyi flow, peak performance zone, that type of thing, right? And that happens when you're at the edge of your capacity and you're fully present with what you're doing and you're challenging yourself. You have clear goals and objectives, right? And so that's where the most fun happens. And so what I want to reintroduce to people is the idea like, man, our next decades can be our best ever.
Mm-hmm.
We have to choose it though. If we go to default and we start being, I'm in shape for my age and I haven't really gotten clear on what I'm compelled to do in the future, but I'm sure I'll fill it up with stuff. Probably not going to be that much fun. You might have a beautiful house and an amazing car and, all the stuff. But at the end of the day, your life experiences are the emotions that you have throughout the day. Did you have joy? Did you have excitement? Did you have enthusiasm? Did you have challenge, right? And that's really your life experience. It just, you may be having that experience in a mansion or not. But your life experience is really going to be the emotions you have, not the materials that you're surrounded by.
Yeah, very true. We live in a very backwards way of living. I think of Stephen Covey said, he's like, you just have to flip what you're doing because most people are living backwards. And rightfully so. Most people, they think of 65, for example, as their retirement age. They think that's when they can start their life and they can finally be free. But what happens on the way there? Many people don't even pay attention. They don't necessarily see the pounds getting packed on. They don't see how quick their children are growing up. And as you said, now they're empty nesters and they have gone from one purpose and now seeking fulfillment and purpose once more. Because what happens, especially when you're a parent, is that when that child is born, you're like, wow, like this is another of my purposes. Not to say that the purposes that you had prior to that are magically gone, but it is a new purpose. And then as soon as they're 18 to 21, depending on
14.
Your goals or their goals.
Right? I mean, when they get some independence, you are no longer the center of their life. That period of time is rather short. They're still loving and all those things. But I heard this, it was like a comedian talking. He was like talking about like selling the idea of being a parent as a job. And he's like, so like there's this job posting and I'm looking at it, it's got like all these responsibilities to it, and I do this and I do that. And he's like, wow, like that's amazing. Like, how much does it pay? And the guy's like, well, no, it doesn't pay. You pay. You legally have to pay until they're 18 years old. So yeah, you get the job, but you pay. And he's like, well, what do I get in return? He goes, you get unconditional love from the time they're an infant till they're 18. Well, till they're 13 or 14. And then it's like, what is dad now? It comes around that my kids are 21 to 23 now, and it is it's nice to see everything. All of a sudden, dad's not as clueless as I used to be.
But then as soon as they start to hit their 30s, they're going to really appreciate you even more than if they don't appreciate you now. And I don't think that's the case.
Yeah. I think it was just, that kind of like teen where you have to break free.
Yes.
Right. It's just like the terrible twos. You want to have them get that independence, and the same thing as in their teen years. You want them to be finding independence, right? At the end of the day, if they're not independent, you failed. And you failure to launch, right? But it does feel funny as a parent. Like all of a sudden you're like, hey, you want to hang out with mom and dad? And they're like, no.
It's very interesting how we go from, taking care of them to one day just allowing them to figure out the world for themselves. And we are still their safety net, especially around those 13 or the teen years. They have to go off and explore the world to be able to navigate the world for themselves, because we can't always fight their battles. We can't always protect them. We're not always going to be there. And it's the same thing with the analogy. You can teach a man to fish, or you can give a man a fish, right? So if you just give everything to your children, they're never going to learn how to fish. And the idea is we have to allow them to do the things in life that are going to help them build for the future. And when I'm thinking of what allows a person to build, there could be many different situations or scenarios, because some people, they fall into the circumstances of their parents. And so, for example, my father was an alcoholic, and I could have said, hey, I'm going to be an alcoholic too, just like my father. And, there was a time when I was 20, 21, where it was like 6 to 9 months of me drinking, going out and partying, right? And then eventually I said, you know what, let me stop this. And I slowly was able to stop it. But then I still retained some of the habits of maybe having a beer on a weekend or something like that. And it wasn't until I did like a deep dive into saying, hey, do I need this? Where am I going to be if I keep going down this path? And I just did the work. And it's a lot of work. A lot of people don't do the work to look 5 years, 10, 15 years into the future. People are just worried about today and maybe tomorrow. So, so their to-do list, or their list of things that they want to do doesn't go a long period of time, or it's not foreseen into the future as far as planning should be. For example, a business who is wanting to thrive, they're probably thinking at least 5 years into the future, but then they're also looking at the trends that are happening every single week, if not every single month. Because if we look at companies like, for example, Kodak, They were the leading camera people. And then there was a time when digital was coming and everyone say, hey, Kodak, you got to get on this digital. And they're like, no, we're just going to keep it old school. And sure enough, Canon came in. It was like, okay, well, we'll take over the digital. And sure enough, now Kodak is a thing of the past. So sometimes you can get left behind if you're not paying attention to what is to come next. And very similar to that circumstances, sometimes people only see what they can see or what they are familiar with. So sometimes their perspection or their perceptives are going to lead them astray. And if you could, can you dive into why sometimes people fall into this trap of staying where they feel comfortable?
Yeah, I think because it's comfortable, right?
Mhm.
I mean, in the book Good to Great, Jim Collins says, why are so few businesses great? Because so many of them are good, right? And you get to the point where you're good and you kind of get comfortable. I also find that even like we're having this conversation, a lot of people listening, I'm imagining, are thinking about their own lives and thinking about the future. I sat down with a guy the other day who has had a successful career in accounting, was with one of the big accounting firms, things along those lines. He's healthy. He seems to have a lot of things. And we started talking about, really envisioning what it looks like from here. And he shared with me, he goes, I've never, ever done this kind of thinking. He's like, I went to college. I got an accounting degree. I came out and got an accounting job. I did the next job. I just showed up, but I never really stepped back to think about, like, where's that really going to go? And so now that he doesn't have the guardrails being presented to him or the tracks being laid down in front of him, it's incumbent upon him to begin to think about, like, well, how are you going to craft this next part of your life? Because again, he's quite a physically fit guy. So realistically, he's here for another 30 good years, good bet. And then, so you think that's the length of time, probably close to the length of time that he was professionally involved. That's a long period of time. 1.5 times the length of time your kids were in your house. And you look back at that length of time and you're like, wow, 1.5 times. And I'm not really envisioning how I'm going to use that. So I think that, too often it is like what's right in front of you. And we kind of get that weed eater mentality, right? I'm just going to trim the trees without stepping back and thinking about, how am I going to landscape? Like, oh, that's trimmed nicely, but there's no real design to your yard. There's nothing attractive about the way we strategically place things. And so what I find fun and what I like to do with my clients is really do that, right? When I talk about identity beliefs, in the prism of perspective, when I talk about is the idea is that our life there's tons of different information out there all the time. They estimate that there's about 2 billion bits of information that we could potentially process at any given time. But because of our sensory limitations, we can only process about 120 of them. So you got a couple billion, you're only processing 120. What determines what you're processing? What determines is what you expect to see, right? Because what we're really doing is we're completing the story that we've told ourselves about what's going on. So we're out there looking in the universe for the information that's going to complete our story. But if you're not intentional about the story you're telling yourself and you're allowing yourself to tell that you're a victim or that you're limited, or then you aren't having an active role in determining how that filter works. And you're getting raw material that's coming in that's all haphazard, or maybe it's even mostly negative. And so one of the real benefits is to one, frame your story, look at your story in your life and think about, like, how do you have a hero's journey in your life rather than a victim story? Because victim stories can feel good in the moment, right? Like, because I'm not responsible and I can blame or complain and do whatever I do. But that habit of blaming and complaining about the past just leads into us looking for things to blame and complain in the future. Whereas if we look at, hey, look, here's my life and I ran into this and I overcame this and I ran into this and I overcame that. What were the tools? What were the weapons? What were the shields that I used to protect myself and to be a warrior in my life so that I can keep using them? And I think that, having that idea, like, what's that story? And then really, what is the future is your purpose and your vision. So how clear are you about why you're here today? And what is it that you really want to create? And how are you going to create it? What values are you going to represent? And I think that's a big one too. I was just doing a little bit of work on one of my core values is courageous authenticity. And the reason I came up with the courageous piece of that is I found that I found myself, and this is going back a ways, to be pretty myself, pretty much myself, but I would sometimes not be fully myself in order to fit in, right? So I was cowardly authentic, right? I was authentic as long as there was nothing at risk. And values are about understanding, like, no, these are the things that I'm going to make decisions on, right? This is how I'm going to choose to move forward. And so understanding, like, what are the values that you're going to make a stand for? So when you move into the future and there's an opportunity to just fit in, right? Instead of really expressing, like, hey, I'm not saying my opinion's right, but I'm going to share with you what I believe to be true, and I'll tell you why. And let's have a conversation.
Right.
But I'm not going to pretend that I feel a different way than I really do. Right. And so I think, like, when working in that way, thinking about, like, what are we really going to create, understanding, like, who we've been and telling that story in a way that makes us feel powerful. Because if you tell that story in a way that, like, you're a victim, then you see this obstacle coming and you're like, oh, I wonder, how I'm going to explain away the reason I wasn't able to achieve this. Whereas if you look at it and say, oh yeah, that's challenges come. Wow, look at that challenge I already overcame. And, I use these skills and gifts and talents that I've developed through my life. I'm going to use those and, maybe I'll develop them even better. So that's, kind of my thought. And when we look at why so few people, I wouldn't say so few, but way too many, way too many sub-optimized, right? Like optimal performance. Most people are really sub-optimizing. And what it's costing them is a lot of joy and impact.
I think of just the idea of the journey of what life is. A lot of people think of how far they have left to go and not so much of how much they have done. And sometimes the things they have done, they will love nothing more than to sweep it under the rug and forget about it. Some people are living in past traumas and negativities and doubts and insecurities and a broken identity, or maybe values that are not as strong and defined as they could be, to help them, truly focus on the future a lot better. But when I'm looking at what people do, is they fall into this idea of I'm doing my best, and sure, right, you can definitely do the best you can today. But when you were talking about optimizing and, like, finding the edges, I think that's powerful, because you might be at a really rough spot today, and it could be whatever trauma, reason, hardship, sickness, whatever, right? You could be at a really tough spot today. Do you plan on being there tomorrow? And some people, they say, yeah, I'm going to be here tomorrow. But then there's some people who say, I don't want to be here tomorrow. And those are the people who claw and climb out of the situations, rather than people just say, hey, this is what it is. And I've been really diving into this concept on the podcast recently, because what I find is that as much as people will love to enhance themselves and to enhance their life, they have this New Year's mentality of, I'll do it for a little bit, but I won't do it long term. Very similar to going to the gym. Some people might do it in a season. I'm going to go on keto. I'm going to go on paleo. I just want to fit in this wedding dress or something like that, but they don't make it a lifestyle. And I think of even myself, it's something I have to be cognizant about. I've been working out since I was 15, and I do it religiously. But then I give myself a different mission every season of life. For example, we have younger children. We have a son, he's 3. We have a daughter, she's 7 months, right? So very young children.
You're in it.
Yeah, I'm in it. But what I love is that, like, the boy right now, he's like jumping on me and climbing on me. And I remember when I was growing up, my father, he was in construction for a period of time, and he was lifting boulders and 1-ton machines. I remember I went to work with him one day and I tried to move one of the machines, couldn't even budge it, not even like a millimeter. It was impossible for me. And he just looked at me and just did it with one hand. I said, whoa. And I was probably like 9, 10 at the time. So he and his arms are just huge. And I was like, wow, like this is strong. And he was able to throw us up in the air and fling us all around like, we were a pillow. And I was like, this is something I want to be able to do with my children. And so I give this idea of, I'm going to the gym, not because I've been doing it since I was 15 and just kind of a mundane thing that I do in my routine in my day, but I want to do it for my children to give them that same experience. So when they are able to be 7, 8, 9, 10, I can throw them up. They can see dad lift something very heavy. And to give this idea of health or being fit is a mindset, but then it's also a mentality of you can choose it, or you can just choose to be, for lack of better words, actually, I want to use this word, a slob and do nothing all day. You can make some changes. And I understand there's some people who don't have that mentality. And I understand there's some people who don't have that urge, because some people, for some reason, they say, I don't like working out. It doesn't work for me. I say you just haven't found the right workout for you, because you don't have to go to the gym and lift heavy weights. You can go do yoga. You could do walking. You could do cycling. You could do swimming. There are just so many activities that you can go just be active. But this idea now, I'm instilling into him health at a young age, or just for the longevity of life. But then I have to be cognizant, because there might come a time when my kids are grown up now, and I might say, oh, I can lift up the gas a little bit. All right, I don't have to go lift up these kids anymore and all of these things. But then I remember there was a story. I can't remember the story, but it was a story of a father and the son had got sick, and the son wasn't even able to get out of bed anymore. And the father was old. He was probably 60 something years old. And he was able to
Not so
lift.
old, by the way.
Yeah. he
When you're talking to a 62-year-old, you got to go, he's old. He was 80.
he was just about seasoned, but not quite. And he was able to pick up his son and take him to the bathroom from the hospital and everything. And he probably never thought he would have to do this again in his life. But he was ready for it, just in that idea of you never know what's going to happen. So I just think of this idea of always being ready, similar to like a battle, like analogy. Like you always want to be ready. Tools, for example, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. The mentality, the mindset of like optimal performance is not something we should just simply forego because we don't need it yet.
Right. Yeah. And when I think about, when I was young, and I was like, in college and things like that, I worked in the fitness industry, and I essentially wanted to look really good to pick up checks, right? I mean, that was
Same.
was the whole deal, right? And it is funny because like sometimes like if someone says something like, as a 62-year-old, I work out every single day. I haven't missed a day in years. But I do it in a way that allows me to recover. I don't kill myself. I don't, I believe, go back to the edges, like the reason exercise works is that essentially it's an evolutionary response that your body's attempting to thrive in the environment within which you live. And so if you create an environment that challenges your body to be able to do stuff, and sometime down the road, a long ways, I know that eventually I'm going to die, and sometime short of that, I'm going to start to lose some function. But I don't expect that to happen for quite some time, because I keep asking my body to have all the function. And if you approach exercise and think about exercise or growth in general as the idea that you're just pressing against your capacity, that you don't have to, like the old, idea of like killing yourself in a workout. And I actually used to work for the guy that started high intensity strength training, Arthur Jones, the guy that invented Nautilus equipment, right? And so one of his things was you have to go to failure. He was the guy that pushed to failure. And so, the idea was like, if you're not failing, then why would your body bother to get better? And at first, for a long time, I used to believe that. But then, like, talk about a business, right? So you're building your business. Do you wait until you are unable to meet the capacity of your clients before you hire someone new? No, you hire in advance, right? Because you're growing. And so do you really think that you as a business person is smarter than the universe? No. So your body's you don't have to necessarily, you just have to come to those edges. And what happens is the edges just keep moving. And so your capabilities keep moving, even if you've never gone to failure, right? Even if you never did, because what would happen is your body would say, hey, you know what? John might need to be a little stronger tomorrow. Let me build that capacity. Because the reason we have physical capabilities is not some like reward because you went to the gym or, it's so you can survive in the environment that your body thinks it's going to live in. And so as we do that, I think that, we're able to stay super fit. And I personally, like when I think about working out, because sometimes I have friends I'll see at the gym, and they train in ways that, like when I exercise, they go strength, flexibility, cardiovascular, balance, coordination, body awareness, and resistance to injury. And I would never do really explosive stuff. I know that other people will tell you, oh, you should do plyometrics, but injuries occur when force exceeds the structural integrity of a system, right? So if you think about a car wreck, right, when that's how it happens. You break a bone, things along those lines. Well, if you're doing exercise and you have a lot of force, then you're going to increase your risk of injury. And then injury takes you out for a while because you have to recover. And so I want to be able to do what I'm doing today when I'm 85. So I train for that. I don't ever think about, but maybe I could press myself a little further. Maybe. But for my goal, which I think is a goal that makes sense as you mature, I'm married, not picking up chicks, not been over a long time. So the real thing is like functionality. Same thing I work with my clients on. I want us to think about how do we keep contributing to the world all the things that you've learned, all your skills, your gifts, your talents, your passions, and you're going to need physical energy to do it. So let's think about how do we make sure that you have the physical vitality and energy and capability to live the life you want to live. And that requires smart, intentional, thoughtful exercise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true. I think of just this idea of longevity. And I think of my great-great-grandmother, and my great-grandmother, and my grandmother. And my great-great-grandmother, she lived to 102. My great-grandmother lived to 99. And my grandma, she's still alive, but she has dementia. And she developed dementia probably 20 years earlier than my great-grandmother. And what happened with her, it wasn't that it was in the blood, yeah, sure, it was in the system and the genes and everything, was that she just had too much free time. Like she didn't have any purpose. She didn't have any grandbabies to take care of. She didn't give herself any books. She was kind of just there in the home, right? And then it just started to exacerbate a lot quicker than it would if she was more active, maybe going to book clubs, hanging out with friends more. It was this idea of at 65, I will retire. And she worked at the hospital delivering babies for 30 plus years. And so, for her, the retirement was, nice and everything. But then it brought about so many other issues for her to say, well, what do I do next? And I can't imagine, what that conversation is with yourself when you reach that crossroad. And I can only think of one solution would be to get a coach like yourself, John, because if we are looking for something we don't know, we're going to be looking for a very long time. Think of you're in the forest, for example, and you have never been in the forest before. You don't know any of the edible plants, the species or whatever. You're just going in there blind. And you could do trial and error and get some food poisoning or maybe not even make it out of the forest. Or you can say, hey, let me find a guru. Let me find someone who has already done it. Let me find someone who's living amongst the trees and can be my Tarzan, can be my teacher in the sense. And I think it's where people thrive the best is when they seek help, is when they seek support, because there's going to be a time in my life that I know when I reach a hard point or a point I don't know, for example, business, I get business coaches because I know, hey, I don't know this. So let me find someone who has done it and who knows it so I can learn it rather than just me blindly going through all the mistakes of what could be a business. And yes, it can be enjoyable, but I think more people, they want to see themselves win than lose constantly. So this idea of, helping people win and helping people prosper, I think is so important. And as we begin to wrap up our conversation, I would love to get some final words from you. And then for you to please tell the audience where they can find you, reach out to you, and begin working with you.
Okay. So my final words on that is I am 100% in agreement, right? I think that I was a financial advisor. And when I did that work, what we would do is work with people and sit down and think about what do you really want to financially experience in your future? And then we'd build plans to help them achieve it and look at tax efficiencies and things along those lines. I moved into the coaching world when several of my clients who were doing fine financially at other elements of their lives that were falling apart. One guy had a heart attack. One guy was getting a divorce. Another guy's kid was going into drug rehab. And it all literally happened in a week. So I had these 3 clients have these big life-changing events. And I realized that he's being as a financial planner, even though I was talking about the future with him, the only thing we were really looking at is the money. We talk about what they wanted to have, where they wanted to travel, et cetera, et cetera. But what ultimately my role was helping them connect their finances from point A to point B. And I think that finances are just an example of resources. And we have so many different resources. Like, how do you want to use your physical energy? How do you want to use your gifts and talents that you have to create a future that is exciting? Because our lives are so much more exciting when we're fully engaged in something. Just like you were talking about your grandma, her latter years. And again, sometimes it happens. My mom also had dementia. She died from it. And Alzheimer's. And, there was definitely some genetic, but also her life was structured in such a way that it lent itself to that, right? We used to believe that the brain was fully developed, like the brain's fully developed at 25, but we know by, information about neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, and the brain can continue to build new pathways. And it does that based on where there's demand, right? The brain is always trying to figure out, okay, there's some demand here. There's an expectation here. And so by continually challenging ourselves in all of those areas, we continue to make it happen. And when I think about coaching, I got all kinds of blind spots about my own life, right? But I don't have your blind spots. And so coaching is, in a way to bring in somebody with new perspective into, you talked about Covey earlier. Like, you remember quadrant 2 time from 7 Habits, right? So you're going into the important stuff. And you're going in there with somebody that has no agenda other than to help you fulfill your life in the way you want to. But they don't have your limiting beliefs. They don't have your negative stories about yourself. And they're going to be somebody that's going to say, hey, maybe that's true, but let's look at it a little differently. What if you look at it from over here? And how would that show up? And so to optimize our lives, I just always think it's, very helpful. You don't have to, but it's helpful to do it that way. So, I can be found on different places. Instagram, I'm Coach John Geraghty. My website is john-geraghty.com. And also the Flow Cultivator, which is a program that I do to help people have more flow in their lives. Fitness Presence is the fitness program that I designed. So there's lots of places. We'll send all the notes to you guys free for the website or the podcast notes. Life, let's just keep making it fun and exciting and appropriately challenging. And like you said about exercise, find it so that it's fun for you, right? Find whatever it is in your life, find the challenge, because we know being bored is not enjoyable. Being in overwhelm isn't enjoyable either. Find your Goldilocks, find that thing's the right amount of challenge so that every day you wake up and you got the right amount of challenge and you're really having to show up. You get a chance to feel good, wake up the next day, do it again. And the compounding effect of gradually, incrementally making improvements in your life is transformative. So, I'm a big believer in compounding incremental growth. And kind of like I said with exercise, you don't have to kill yourself. Just consistently push on those edges. And the compounding effect will take you to a totally different place.
I love everything you said. I'm going to throw all those links for people to be able to reach out to you, your fitness program, as well as the book that we didn't really talk about too much, but I think it's going to be a great asset or a great tool for many people in their toolboxes to look at life in a new light. As you said, we all have blind spots, but it's better to do the work or to find someone who can help us cover those blind spots. It's like that blind spot sensor in the car is letting us know, hey, there's something there. So you better think twice. And just sometimes just having someone say, hey, let's look at it in a different light. Let's look at it in a new perspective or a new prism. And we can definitely make some changes if need be. If not, let's see what happens. But I just love everything that you're doing, John. And I think that you're going to be a great asset for anyone who reaches out to you and is looking to optimize their life. So I do want to thank you, John, for coming on, spending some time, and of course, talking about your work today.
Well, thank you so much for this platform. I love the work you're doing. Also, get people an opportunity to find out who's the right fit, because that's another thing about coaching, right? I'm absolutely not the right coach for, tons of people, but other people that you have on will be. And so the idea is, like, when somebody really resonates with you, then move with that. and that's probably a good indicator. But anyway, thank you so much for the work you're doing, Michael. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.